Next up, Hot Ticket, Selling Immersive Home Theaters, Private Cinemas. We've got a spectacular panel for this. I'd like to remind you about the format. Presentation, followed immediately by Q&A. If you have a question and you'd like to ask the panelists, there's a mic in the middle of the floor. If you don't want to walk to the mic, I'm happy to bring a microphone to you. I like to get my steps in during these trade shows. George Walter will kick us off. He is the president of RAVA, and he will begin and then introduce the rest of today's panelists. George is a 30-year veteran of the audiovisual industry. He is the president of RAVA, as I mentioned, that launched back in 2016 to bring engineered and fully personalized turnkey home theaters to market. He oversees and facilitates RAVA's sales, marketing, and vendor relations. George has also been a CEDIA member for the past 20 years and served on the board of directors. George Walter, the floor is yours.
Wow, thanks. Great, so this is working. Welcome, everybody. This is a pretty exciting topic that we're going to have here today. A few of the things that we're going to talk about. You know, when I was first asked to host this about home theater, I said, well, the biggest problem is, what do you mean by home theater? I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever Googled home theater, but when you do that, you get just tons of answers. And they range over such a broad array of services and products. So one of the things that we're going to talk about today is we're going to get a little feedback from every one of our panel members here about what home theater is to them. Then we're going to talk about client expectations, because as you all know, in our industry, leads and profitability all originate from client referrals. So if you're not meeting or exceeding client expectations, you're probably on a downward spiral. So I'd like to have each of our panel members talk about what that means to them and how they approach that. We're going to talk about the standard things like scope of work and budget. But then we're also going to talk about a few things like, how do you sell home theater? You know, do you sell like a list of equipment, or do you sell it in a different way? And I think that's probably one of the more interesting topics. And then finally, if you talk about what this room is made up of, it's made up of a lot of different equipment from all these different exhibitors, but at the end, it's the room performance that's really important. And that's what really defines client expectations. So with that said, let's jump to the panel. Let me introduce some of our experts here. Christina Stroh, Dennis Erskine, and Jason Barth. So to kick off here, let's have everybody talk about what home theater means to them and their clients. Christina?
So a home theater to me is not a multi-use room. So it's a theater, and it has theater seating. It has, at minimum, surround sound, preferably some acoustic panels and acoustic treatments. And preferably some nice lighting, so even while the movie is being presented, you can still see kind of your way around the room.
From my perspective, home theater is meaningless. It's because the term is overused and describes a broad spectrum of capabilities. So what I work towards is private cinema, which conveys more of what we are after and what we're trying to create.
And I would agree with that, the private cinema terminology, although I think in the real world we also have many clients that have open spaces. So to me, home theater is an immersive experience, a large format video, immersive surround sound, but maybe the room is open, there's a bar at the back or a game or rec area adjacent. So we're about 50-50 closed private cinema rooms and then open rooms.
Great, thank you. So let's start out talking about client expectations. Christina, when you sit with a client, and how do you go through that process of understanding what their expectations are so you know kind of what you're getting into?
Well, I would probably ask that exact same question that you just asked us. What does that term home theater mean to them? Because it is a huge range. So you can get someone that's going to answer it and say, oh, I want everything, but then they later on tell you that their budget's only $10,000. So I like asking what that means to them. And then you also, I mean, almost before you're even asking what home theater means to them, you have to ask budget. You don't want to waste anyone's time, and you have to get straight to the point of what are you actually wanting to do, and can you afford to do that?
My conversation with clients is not initially about budget. Sometimes I'm asked, what equipment are you going to give me? I said, no, I haven't designed the car yet. How can I tell you what engine I'm putting in it? So I am more focused on what is the experience they're trying to obtain. What reference do they use for that experience? So I begin to get a feeling as to what the end result needs to be for this particular family, particular room, and how they're going to use it. We have clients that use it for cinema, and we have them using it for Zoom conferences for business. So it's a broad spectrum.
Yeah, and I think we frequently start out with a very simple question: how many people do you want to be able to seat or entertain in your home theater space? If, let's say, for example, they say 12 to 15, and their room is 14 feet wide and 16 feet deep, we all know that's not going to happen. So, starting to manage just this general space plan, what are we dealing with? What are those expectations? And we start forming, again, that immersive experience based around the audience that's going to be sharing the experience together.
Okay, so once you've started that discussion about understanding clients' expectations, the next logical thing, as Christina pointed out, is budget, because you can't have one without the other. So when we talk a little bit more about budget, one of the things I'm going to ask each of our panelists is kind of what their sweet spot is. Because as we talk further into this, that'll kind of be the reference point. Because as many of you know, you can have a home theater that's $10,000, or you can have a home theater that's $1 million. And there's several points in between. And I think most of the integrators that I speak to, they find a sweet spot. And that doesn't mean that's all they do, but that sweet spot is really where they perform the best. So given that, Christina, what would you define as your sweet spot when you start talking about budget to clients?
Yeah, I think that we have found our sweet spot probably to be around like a $50,000 range. We feel like that gives a pretty good, realistic budget for a decent theater for our average clientele.
In our case, we're different than most in that we're a design-build organization. So we don't take on projects that we're not also engaged to do the construction of the room. And so our sweet spot is generally in the $200,000 to $300,000 range. We've done some above that and some below that, but that's where we're at.
And interestingly, I think we sit generally right between there. Most of our rooms, true private cinemas or home theater rooms, are really going to start in that $50,000 range and probably move more up to $125,000, maybe up to $150,000. We've got a $350,000 room going in right now, but that's not our sweet spot. Those are special clients in our market.
Great. So even with this panel, we've got a pretty broad range. So that kind of leads me to the next question, which is scope of work. And Dennis kind of pointed out that his perception or his activity is a little bit broader than most because he's actually doing the construction and the build out of the room. But with reference to scope of work, that is one of the things that you also have to speak with your client about so that they understand exactly what you're going to be doing, how much time you're going to be spending there, how much in and out. So Christine, why don't you address that a little bit?
So I think with the scope of work, what I've seen a lot within our industry is people that, in my opinion, it's not a scope of work. A scope of work should be very broad. You shouldn't be listing like, oh, we're going to be putting in these specific speakers. That's not a scope of work. So kind of like Jason was saying that he is saying that he's building this immersive experience. To me, that's what a scope of work is. You're saying that you're going to provide this experience. You're going to make sure that even if you can say like it's going to seat 6 and it's going to provide this true home cinema feel that you are immersed into this context. I do think it's extremely important though to discuss your time frame with people. Most people don't, and then your client has no idea that you're actually planning on being in there for a month and they're expecting you to be in and out in 2 days. And a month is fine, but you have to tell your client that that's what their expectations should be. So I just think that really covering all your expectations on that scope, on kind of that summary of the project is extremely pertinent.
Yeah, in our case, we sell the room. because that's part of the experience. And in fact, the audio in a room, 80% of what you hear comes from the room itself, not from the speakers. And so we have the discussion as to why we're insisting on building the room. One of the things we have to do is we have to get the noise floor down below 22 dB, or you've already missed the first mark. The other thing we're discussing HVAC, they want to put 12 people in the room. So, well, that's 6,000 BTUs an hour of cooling. Oh, whoops. And so when we get to the discussion of how long you're going to be in my house, typically on average from studs to completed, calibrated, here's the keys to the room, is 20 to 25 days, but that's in 2 separate trips. And our work is all over the US, North America, and so forth. We have clients in the Caymans. I told them only call for service calls during February.
Yeah, I think, again, sitting somewhere in between the two here, we try to get across that a private cinema or a home theater space is a technical room first and foremost. I mean, the expectation is if you're selling the room that it has to perform, as Dennis said. And so getting the client to understand that we need to technically design, the space plan, the seating arrangement, screen size, sight lines, speaker placement. We all know there's so much that goes into it, and then we have to make it look beautiful, right? But I think to compromise on the technical aspect of a theater and acoustics and just all the things that go into it would be a big mistake. So once you go into that, take that path, the client tends to just kind of turn it over to you and trust you more, and you're not picking products out and making product decisions. You're able to truly provide the room.
Great. Well, while we're on that topic, we did discuss a little bit, and certainly off camera we have, about the actual selling process. What goes into the room is a whole list of equipment, but how you actually sell that, how you engage with the client and get them excited and motivated and saying, yeah, I want to do this, is kind of a different approach. So if we jump kind of right off that scope of work and we talk about the selling process, Jason, why don't you give us some examples of how you sell the experience?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the easiest is to demo the experience, right? To take them into a space, perhaps in your showroom, or if you don't have a showroom, maybe a client will let you tour their space. But when we talk about the whole experience, it's great lighting, it's great decor, is there a starry sky? We all know that, I think we all know that people buy how things make them feel, not what they are. They didn't buy a 2200 lumen projector. They bought how the experience and how the room made them feel. So it's very much, you need to connect emotionally with the client. Know them before you give the demo. Know what kind of content they're going to like or not like. I have clients that straight up call me out on it. They're like, yep, you played the Lady Gaga, Tony Bennett track. How'd you know those were our 2 favorite artists? And I'm like, well, we did our homework. You play into that. Be blatant about it. It's kind of fun.
Well, kind of sticking in reverse order here, Dennis, you've done some incredible rooms. A couple of those have been pictured here behind us. I mean, if ever there was an experience which is far greater than the sum of its parts, how do you sell that? How do you get them to envision what they're going to ultimately end with?
I don't look at this as being a selling process. I look at it as being an educational process, because in most cases the clients don't know what questions to ask. And the other thing is they don't know what the engineering requirements are. The question is, why do I have to have a room that's less than 22 dB? Well, that's because that's the quietest sound recorded on the soundtrack. And the background noise in your house is around 33 dB, so that's a 6 to 8 times. You turn up the volume, you can hear the whisper. People on the screen are now yelling at you, not speaking to you. When the train wreck happens, then the subwoofers are bottoming out, the tweeters are blowing. And one of the biggest complaints, of the 2 big complaints that theaters fall out of use, is one, they're too loud. Mama leaves the room and you're out mowing the lawn. And the other is, they're too hot and stuffy. And so you have to go through this education process of why are you concerned about 12 people in this room? Because I'm concerned about air exchanges. I'm concerned about how much it would take to cool this room in Adak, Alaska. So We look at it as an educational process to bring them up to the level to understand why we're doing what we're doing.
Christina?
Yeah, I think both of them have great points. Jason was saying, like, you're selling an experience, but you need to know what the experience they're looking for. And so asking them, you know, what movies they're liking, but also how you're using the room. A lot of people, at least in our demographic, are parents, and so being able to sell that, like, look, you're going to be able to have this experience in your home theater and keeping your teenage kids with you and wanting to hang out with you. You're going to be the cool house that all the other kids come to. That's an experience. That's something that they're wanting. They immediately grasp onto that. Yes, I want my kids to stay at home. Yes, I want to be the cool house. I want all their friends to hang out here. But if you're selling to a single male, that might not be the experience that they're looking for. So, you know, you have to dig a little bit more. This isn't just selling something. You're actually getting to know your clients and what they want, how they're going to use the space. And then you use those demos like that, right? Like, even if they have young kids, you probably aren't going to put on like Peppa Pig. That's not enticing to the parent by themselves. So think of something that they could watch together. You know, Avengers is a great one because they know that, okay, even younger kids are starting to like something like that, and you can create that good vibe that they both can connect to. And so you're creating that experience and that interaction that they're really thriving for. I also think educating your client on what they need and why they need it is extremely important, but you have to set the tone that you're the expert and that you know what you're talking about. And some of that stuff you have to explain to them, but some of that stuff will go right over their head and they really don't care. But if they are confident that you know what you're talking about and you say you need it, then they need it.
One of the things I'd like to add to that conversation is a lot of clients look at a home theater or private cinema as an interior design exercise. It's not. It's an engineering exercise first, and then the interior design becomes the frosting on the cake.
That's a great point. You know, and it does lead me to the next question. All this equipment has individual specifications. You know, a projector has brightness specifications. An amplifier has, you know, watts per channel. But all those things go into a room, right? And at the end of the day, the room actually has to have specifications. You know, it's one of the things Dennis and I have talked about over the years is that you can have a great projector, but if it's really loud and it has to be in the room, that's a problem because that's impacting the performance specifications of other pieces that are part of this theater. And trying to figure out that all, as Dennis pointed out very well, it's engineering, right? And that's, to me anyway, the performance of the room. So maybe, Dennis, you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm often asked at various stages during the design process, what equipment, how big is the screen going to be, what projector should I buy? I'm going to say, look, I haven't designed the room yet. And so until the room is designed, I don't know what engineering specifications the equipment has to match. And if they're totally ambivalent about what physically goes into that room, I'll put in what I think is best. But if they want to have some freedom to pick and choose, I mean, everybody has their own favorite brand, or they've read something about something else. What I do is I say, these are the engineering specifications that need to be matched by the speakers, by the projector, and by other components. So if your favorite stuff matches these specifications, then we can deal with that and see if that will work.
Jason, you want to give your thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, I think kind of bridging off that, shameless plug for CEDIA. They came out with the CEDIA Designer tool, which is a great introductory tool. If you're not using it, I recommend you guys check it out. We use it on every single theater room project, whether the client thinks they're spending 20 grand or 200 grand. It just allows you to plug in the room dimensions, you know, seating placement, riser, screen size, and it basically just does a lot of math, right? It says, hey, if we're just going to have carpet in this room, we're going to be at a 1.7 second reverberation time. You can start playing with how much treatment, absorption, and diffusive. It doesn't allow you to place anything. It's not a full design tool, but it gives you an introductory process that you can knock out in 10 or 15 minutes, literally. to provide you with a lot of data that you can use as ammunition that's with your client that says, hey, if we use this specific screen size at this seating distance with this projector, you're going to have 28-foot Lamberts, right? And so there, it just gives you a lot of good targets to hit. And then, you know, I think Dennis then probably takes it extremely beyond that. But it's a good starting point, you know, if you're not going to spend 80 hours designing a theater and you just want to know, try to predict a result that you're going to get with a modest amount of effort.
Well, and I think Dennis had a great point. Like, he was saying, a lot of times you'll have clients ask you right there on the spot, like, so what are you thinking in here? What do you, and it's okay to say, there's a lot of stuff that goes into this. This is not an out of the box thing. You're not walking into Best Buy. I'm not going to tell you the same answer I told the last 3 guys because this room is different. It's okay to tell them you're going to have to wait. I haven't designed that yet.
Great. So now kind of to bring things to the current state. You know, there's a lot of new products. You know, the one thing about home theater and private cinema is that you've got audio, you've got speakers, you've got video, you've got environment. And when I say environment, I mean the acoustics, the seats, and all the pieces and parts of it. And they're all changing on a regular basis. So the question for the staff now is, or the panel now is, of everything that you see coming out at the show or kind of in this next 12 months, what's the hot topic? What's the thing that most excites you about what's coming to home theater, private cinema? Dennis, you want to start?
I got a couple.
My crystal ball is kind of foggy because things are moving so fast, but it's interesting from the time we start a project to the time we're getting to the point where we can actually specify and order equipment, the whole world has changed. And one of the biggest changes is HDR. And that has caused a massive amount of trouble. Because what happens is a screen, whether it's vinyl or woven, makes no difference. Its job is to reflect light back into the room, right? That's what it's supposed to do. But HDR requires that we suddenly have more foot Lamberts coming off the screen than we have ever had before. And what's happening? That additional light, foot Lamberts, is reflecting back off the walls into the room, which makes it back to the screen, which reduces what? Your in-room ANSI contrast. And so that's a very difficult problem to solve in many rooms, particularly ones that are narrow as opposed to wider. But what comes after that, I mean, you've got the audio part is the most exciting with full immersion in audio. But it's also the most troublesome to set up right. And so you've really got to deal and look into the specifications and requirements for immersive audio because it is really too easy to screw up. And particularly when you're trying to deal with, you can't put a speaker there because there's a plumbing line. Well, you're spending $300,000 on this projector, so why don't we spend $50,000 to move the damn, plumbing line that's in our way of doing it right? And so I would be irresponsible to suggest what's coming next because it'll slap us in the face, I guarantee you.
I'd suggest that there are some technologies that have been around a long time because the reality is the principles of the home theater are the same project to project, even though we've said that every room is different and clients perceive to have different needs. It's the same criteria that goes into each project. And so I just think that what we've seen from the manufacturers is the quality of what you can get now at the price point continues to get better. I think most importantly, 2 things. The software correction, you know, correcting a room using software in addition to building a room acoustically correctly. The room correction software in some of these products is just phenomenal now. We had a fairly large theater room with a bar off to the front right section of the front of the home theater. So there was no acoustic treatment. You had a wall treated on your left and kind of an open little cave to your right towards the front of the room where you entered. And when I first sat in the room, when we finished it, I was like, man, this is going to be really weird. And then Ken, one of my guys, came in and calibrated the room, and I was shocked. That entire extra space just went away, got very symmetrical, and the sound squared up, and it was very smooth and even, and I was pretty blown away what we could do electronically. And the last thing that I'm going to mention is on the audio side is pro audio coming into the home business. You've seen Kaleidoscape and their partnership with Meyer Sound, and L Acoustics is here. If you guys haven't checked out those two companies, it is simply unfair what Pro Audio is bringing into the home theater space, and pay attention to that because it's shocking.
Christina?
I think that the laser projectors are super cool. I also am a huge fan of Art Novian and their acoustic panels, really kind of not only doing a great treatment, but looking still visually appealing. And I'm really stoked with stuff that's not necessarily theater specific, but I think the DMF lighting is amazing. And Josh AI is taking voice recognition and stuff to a completely different level. So
you mentioned a good thing about lighting. The reference color for color cinema is 6500K. And most dimmable lights do not support 6500K. Some of these color changing ones, not even close. And so if you're in a situation, for example, where somebody's using this for video conferencing, where they have to have lights on in the room, you've got to have lights that will produce 6500K even when fully dimmed. Otherwise, the color balance goes off. And when the color balance goes off, they call you because the color's not right, so obviously something broke. And that's an educational thing. That's also why we use 6500K Kepler fixtures in our rooms.
Well, certainly the introduction of LED lighting, and we've seen it on several of the sample theaters that have come behind here, to me anyway, is one of the biggest, from a design perspective, additions to home theater, because it's relatively easy to add. It adds style. It can completely change the mood of the room just by changing color. The design element, in the past, I think almost all the theaters that we would see 10 years ago was pretty popular to have sconces. And now, probably 50% of the theaters that I see have some really creative LED lighting. And not just on the walls, but the ceilings as well. And I think as we walk around here, the amount of LED lighting just in general in homes and the control of it, it's a big change. So at this stage, we talked about this before. We probably could talk about home theater and private cinema for hours. And we were limited to 30 minutes. So it was kind of all right, let's break it into some chunks that we can wrap our heads around and share a little bit of our experience. But now is an opportunity for you guys to ask anyone here on the panel, the questions that you've been thinking about, or maybe the challenges that you face in your everyday, workday, and get some insight as to how anybody here on the panel deals with it. So with that, I'll open it up to the floor if anybody's got some questions. Sure.
Oh, wait a second.
So at my house, we have sliding barn doors separating our home theater from the rest of the house. And we have like a little nook that's going in there. And then we have like the curtains going in like this, and then you walk into the media room. The one thing that I've noticed with the barn door is it's the worst thing for blocking any kind of audio coming out. However, my wife absolutely loves the barn door. I love it too, it looks nice, all right, but it doesn't really work in regards to keeping the sound of the children's laughter out in the other room playing. So what I wanted to know was we always have family movie night at least once a week, and we all get together in there. And is there any way, what recommendations, would you guys use in a situation where if you're looking down at the room, you would have the barn door here, you would have a nook here, the concession stand is right here, and then I have another wall here with the two curtains, and then there's the media room. So I do have an opportunity to use that extra area right here to add any kind of drapery. Would that help in keeping the sound of outside sound in?
Short answer is no.
Oh.
I was going to say, I'm probably the least technical of everyone up here, but we have a barn door at our house as well, because I love it as well. But I think that there are definitely things to help that. I would agree. The short answer is no. It's never going to sound like a completely closed off, perfect space, right?
Oh, no, yeah, but anything that would help.
Right. The acoustic panels definitely are going to help, and
Okay.
they've helped in our situation. But Jason, like, alluded to, and I'll let him give more of the technical answer on that, but sound correction software would help you immensely.
Really?
Yeah, Dennis is 100% right, and if he's got any brilliant ideas beyond a no, you guys should get together. What I want to mention, it brings up a great conversation about expectations. Clients come in all the time. They say, we want a private room because we want to be able to crank it up, and we don't want anybody else in the house to hear the theater room, and we don't want any sound from outside coming into the theater. And they have simultaneously a totally poor expectation of how difficult that is,
Oh, yeah.
the steps you need to go to, the cost, the design, the engineering of the room.
Yeah,
Sound travels like water. It's going under the door, it's going out the outlet, it's going up the ductwork. There's a handful of great vendors here that can help you with those things, but it starts with great design and engineering.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure there really is a solution.
Yeah, you could definitely have like like the beautiful movie theaters, you know what I mean? But like, I guess from a movie theater on a budget, you know, like things of helping that out, you know what I mean?
Well, the thing that needs to happen between you and your supplier is an approach that we use, and that is, here's the pros and cons of doing it your way, or the way you want for a decorator perspective. And here's the pros and cons of doing it our way. Now you have the pros and cons of both choices, and you get to make, as the metal profession would call it, an informed decision. And so everything is a compromise somewhere down the road.
Sure.
We've done sliding doors before that were sound isolated. On the inside of the room, they look just like the finish of the walls. Each one of those doors weighed 400 pounds. And so that may not, in many people's circumstances, be reasonable or fit what they want to do, which is fine. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not watching movies in your theater, all right? I may make you take my name off the theater, but, you know, that's okay. But you're faced with a situation where you need to know the pros of doing it your way and the cons of doing it your way, and maybe something in between.
Yeah.
And then make a decision that fits your lifestyle.
Awesome. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Anything is open.
Anything we can say no to? Anything else?
I wanted to say one more thing. When we were talking about asking your clients what their expectations are, to be very, very specific. So we had a client that told us that he didn't want anything too big in this room, and we came back with a 65-inch TV, and he was like, oh no, I was thinking of 85-inch. So something 85-inch, I think most people would consider a larger TV, but to him it wasn't. So just him saying, oh, I don't want anything too big, then follow that up with, what does that mean to you? Give me very specific, that talk to me like I'm 5 kind of conversation.
Hi, I have a question. My name is Anton, I'm from Moscow, Russia. We build dedicated rooms there, mostly around the Moscow. I was wanting to know your perspective on new type of micro LED screens and using them in real dedicated cinema rooms. Thanks.
Can you repeat just that? The question.
We haven't done a micro LED screen
Micro LED.
Micro LED,
yet. There's one under consideration currently, but we've been researching the possibilities. One of the problems with an LED screen is, what are you going to do at the center channel speaker, and left and right? And again, that's a compromise. Yeah. I would like to have a full wall micro LED screen myself, but my dog wouldn't appreciate it.
So don't you think it would be too bright in that environment, in black, no lights environment at all?
We'd have to be a lot more specific about what the product is. You know, I know early on the challenges were fixed pixel size, and so you could only do screen, 220, and you're like, that doesn't fit my room, and now there's 180 and 110, and and there's a number of different manufacturers, but what the technology is, what the black level is behind that, and really looking at the engineering and the products, as Dennis described earlier, dictating a specification and then saying, does this product meet the specification? Is this a good product to use in this application or not?
Well, for sure, a couple of things you need to be concerned about is the heat that's generated, the weight. I mean, these are things that we never thought of before with conventional projector screen combinations. You've got to have a processor that matches it properly, because unlike projectors where it's pretty easy to match the resolution of your source to the resolution of your projector, a micro LED can be any number of resolutions. It depends on how many panels you have. Your specific concern about brightness, as this technology evolves, one of the good things about LED is that as it advances, it has a broad range of dimming capabilities. So you can have several different settings. So it's still going to be bright, but as Dennis pointed out, with HDR now, you do have a significantly higher target specification. But I would look heavily towards panels that can be dimmed quite a bit.
And I'm sure there are creative solutions from all the vendors that we're all partners with, but I think about audio. I mean, we do almost exclusively perforated screens so that the speakers are behind the screen. I personally have a problem sticking the speakers on the floor below the screen.
Same.
Sometimes you can balance that out with the height, but a lot of times the screen is up pretty immersive. When we're doing immersive, we're oftentimes filling most of the screen wall as well. So think about audio ramifications there.
Thanks.
Other questions? No? Well, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today, specifically Jason, Dennis, and Christina. And I challenge everybody to enjoy the rest of the show. Any closing comments from the panel?
Just one. That's 6,500 K lighting on those seats.
Well, great. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the show.